here's an example of the profit motive. There was an abandoned government certified factory. I think it was in Ohio or Indiana or something that made anthrax vaccination, and it went out of business. And it was just sitting there unused. And a bunch of guys bought it for pennies on the dollar. And they hired a former, what do you call it when you're the head of the military, like the Joint Chiefs of Staff? They hired a guy that was part of had been part of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, an admiral. And then they hired a guy named Jerome Hauer, and they sent him on the road to do seminars about the danger of anthrax and the fact that the U.S. needed an anthrax stockpile, right? So simultaneous with acquiring this bargain basement factory and then bringing in the general with all the connections, they started this beating the drum. Oh boy, anthrax. This was well in advance of the anthrax poisoning that took place after 9/11. He happened to be the man on the U.S. network television as the buildings were still burning on 9/11, telling everybody that it had to have been Osama bin Laden. So this same man and it gets even better. He's dead, by the way. Thank God this guy's dead from natural causes. God bless him. May he go to heaven. But he's dead because he can't. So number one, he was the guy pushing the need to develop a massive anthrax stockpile, right? In the few years leading up to some crazy man mailing military grade anthrax spores. Let's never forget that. Anthrax is hard to make, and military grade can only be made by who? The military. And when they traced that actual anthrax and they examined it, it had to be done with great precision. Anyway, so Howard was the promoter of that. He was also the guy on TV, literally as the buildings were still burning. And then when COVID came along, guess what his job was? He worked for a risk mitigation corporate consulting company that worked with all the top companies in the world. And his pitch was, listen, there's a virus. You better make sure it's out there. This is when COVID was already in the air. You better make sure you're kind of on the fence. Should we make our employees get the vaccine or should we not? We might have liability if we make them do it and they get sick. And do we even have the legal? Howers came in and said, don't worry about any of that stuff. You must vaccinate them to remove your liability. Okay? So he's just an agent of some diabolical people, but there is this infrastructure of PR people, of lobbyists, of bullshit, or whatever you want to call them, that are out there selling. First he was selling the anthrax, then he was selling Osama bin Laden, then he was selling the need for corporations, not just the need, the requirement for corporations to require the vaccine. So you have all these miscreants who are just they're hired hands. Unfortunately, they exist and they can be deployed, And even Fauci, at the end of the day, he's a hired hand. He's a very destructive hired hand, but he was basically a hired hand. And behind them, you have the manufacturers of these vaccines, and you have people that have another agenda, which is, and you talked about Kissinger and you hit the nail right on the head. It's about controlling the population. And when we're talking about controlling the population, we mean any population that could give us trouble, which started out as the third world and is now becoming the citizens of the developed world, right? Because anything that gets done by empires overseas, they will bring it home and use it against their own people.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And this is the Epstein class, These are people that view other human beings as cattle, as inferior. This is the eugenics movement of the early 20th century, where you ranked people by value and you discouraged the inferior people from reproducing, which crescendoed with the Nazis just flat out murdering people. That's one way to keep people from reproducing. It's that same mentality. So you've got those people, and they're very powerful. For some reason, people in power tend to adopt that view that you've got to stomp down on everybody else. And then you have the profit motive. And then you have the freelance miscreants who are like happy to roll their sleeves up and do evil things. Because they've been, they persuade themselves that they're good things, and that's the motley crew of evildoers who brought us COVID, who brought us the AIDS panic, who engineered the injection of the hepatitis B vaccine into newborns in the United States and in over 100 countries around the world, and who also pitched, contributed to the Great Flu, A, by injecting random substances into American servicemen, and B, by creating a war that ended up with tens of millions of Europeans nearly starving to death.